So it's not a new thing that people are being displaced and people don't have a place to stay or aren't being welcome. But in a different way, maybe at a different scale, I think what we see is there's a growing gap between the services that are given to people at the bottom and the next step for them. So one thing I've noticed a lot is, but the gap between a person who's in public housing and then trying to find affordable housing, that's just getting wider and wider. They can't make that jump as easy. Or the guys who stay here in our shelter, we had for a long time one of the highest rates of placement to permanent housing, but that's getting harder to do because the jump from a shelter into an apartment is just getting bigger and bigger. Something goes on in the world and we know, okay, in a few months we're going to start seeing more of those folks looking for space here. But more than that, I mean, that's the refugees and that's the immigrants, but we find more and more folks even from our own neighborhood, right? So we have now in our shelter, we have a resident who's been a long time resident in the neighborhood. They had a fire in their apartment and there's no other place they can find. Like I said, they were in a little small apartment. Now the only places they can find are over $2,000 a month rent, so they don't have a place to go. So they're now long-term members of the community are now sleeping in the church like anybody else. I'd say the moral perspective on this issue is clear. The Gospels, not just the Gospels, all of the scriptures and from all traditions, they repeatedly use this image of the dwelling place of God. We talk about the sacred that dwells with us, that makes its tent with us, that is on the way with us, this God that's inhabits our being and our communities and our world and our creation. That's throughout all of the scriptures from almost any tradition that you could think of. And so that's this notion that this dwelling place is a sacred place. And throughout the scriptures, the biggest sin that they talk about is the sin of refusing somebody hospitality, right? That's what Jesus says all the time. You love God, but you love your neighbor as you would love yourself. And to love our neighbor is to give them space, right? To give them space in our lives, to give them space in our homes, to give them space in our churches and our synagogues and our mosques. I mean, I say our story, like the Catholic Christian story, starts with a small family, a working dad, a single mom, and a refugee family. Immediately, when Jesus is born, they're at risk and they have to leave. They leave their home, they leave their land, they go to Egypt. And from that point forward, it's a story. It's like a conspiracy of people that are doing what they can to give space to that family. And we call that family the Holy Family, right? And the Christmas story, he's born around back. They don't even have home space in the inn for him. I mean, that's a whole story about a God who's trying to find space in our lives, and by way of those families that are trying to find space in our lives. I mean, if this is going to get me in trouble, it's the kind of trouble I want to get in, which is the trouble that Jesus got himself into, which was asking religious people, asking people in political positions of power to honor the truth. And the truth is that we haven't been the community we want to be to each other, right? And so that message that we are brothers and sisters to one another and that we could create space in our lives for one another, like that message hasn't been heard for thousands and thousands of years, but it's the only message we got to keep spreading. And it's not heard for a lot of reasons, mostly for fear. So I think even in our own churches, Dolores Mission, we get lifted up a lot. What a great thing they do, they give shelter to people. Well, there's a lot of churches in our county that could do the same thing. There's this bill SB4 that we've been pushing, which is about letting churches build on their land affordable housing. We could do that if we chose to do it, but often it's out of fear, you know. Well, what will happen? Maybe it's not safe. Maybe we're going to make our sacred space less sacred. But I can say after almost 4 decades of doing this at Dolores Mission that it's the safest place I've ever been, right? The place where we welcome people is the safest place we can ever be. I mean, they say hope dies last, right? Hope is the last thing that we lose because hope is a thing that we can always have. We can always have hope, and that we have it within ourselves. Um, I was working with somebody back. I used to work in Chicago, and he always said, the hardest thing about getting out of homelessness was changing the notion in himself that he didn't deserve it. He didn't deserve a home, and getting over that idea that you're worthy of it, whether or not you're getting it, whether or not you think it's possible to get it, that it's worthy to work for it and it's worthy to want for it. And that hope that lives in us is always there, even when we're getting rejected and turned away, to know that our desire for the something better is worthy of us, right? That we're worth it.